Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Hello, friends far and near. Thank you so much for joining us today for another wonderful bit of history, modern American history from the 1950s. Jackie, this is another exciting conversation today. Where are we going with it?
Well, this is number 187. We started this a couple of years ago, almost 3 years now. So we want to welcome you all and take note, please, of the www.whilethewindmillwatch.com, that banner below. That's where we invite you to go for so much information about the authors of that book, which is up there in the corner, about the vendors, and about previous 1950s fun chats. The book, While the Windmill Watched, A Slice of Rural America in the 1950s, is a story exactly as it is portrayed in the title. So we invite you to check out those vendors and pick up one of those books because they make great gifts for yourself or someone else. So we're going to begin now with our guest. And this is hi. This is thanks to the influence of the 26th President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, as well as our guest. We will be learning of Medora, North Dakota, where TR lived for a time and where the Rough Rider Hotel is located. And if you are familiar with history, it's named after Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Rider. So our guest is Kinley Slauter. He's employed by the Theodore Roosevelt Medora Foundation as the Director of Entertainment and Attractions. He was born and raised in Berthold, North Dakota, but he's called Medora home since 2001. So over the years, Kinley has been honored with 2 Governor's Awards: the North Dakota Governor's Travel and Tourism Behind the Scenes Award and the North Dakota State Historical Board of Excellence in Local History for restoration of an original home in Medora. It's called the Von Hoffman House, which had been built in 1884. So I encourage you to check that out, the Von Hoffman House, and get to know its history. So Kinley has also enhanced his career with involvement in historical research projects in the community, which have included the Rough Riders Hotel. So Kinley's married to Sarah, and they have 3 children who attend the elementary school in Medora. Kinley, we welcome you to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here.
Good. We look forward to hearing from you. But first of all, before we talk about modern history, let's go back to 1885, when today's topic, which is the Rough Riders Hotel, was known as the Metropolitan Hotel in Medora, North Dakota.
Yeah, so really interesting history around that. Of course, in the 1880s, Medora was founded in 1883. The Marquis DeMores, our founder, had a vision and belief that Medora would be the biggest city between New York and Seattle, which in today's sort of presentation of Medora is kind of remarkable. So Marquis comes, acquires the land where Medora is today, plats the community of Medora. It was laid out essentially like New York City, where very narrow lots. His expectation was that brick buildings would be built wall to wall, like a city, and it was platted that way. One of his first enterprises is Hotel DeMores, a big wood structure, but covered in brick that sat out where today's Fudge Depot is, right on the corner, directly across the street from the depot. That would be the main hotel. He hires a guy named Fitzgerald, George Fitzgerald, to manage his hotel for him. Was probably busy at first, or for a little while, so much that George Fitzgerald was able to save up enough money to build his own hotel. He buys the land about a block up, block over to start building the Metropolitan Hotel, and become a competitor to the Hotel DeMores and the Marquis business, which I think is, again, remarkable to think. Here's the Marquis selling land so that somebody can build a competing hotel. But because again, the Marquis thought, maybe with some arrogance, that Medora is going to be the biggest city, or a huge city, I should say. So Fitzgerald starts building the Rough Riders Hotel in November. 45 days later, it opens. So you think of that winter 1884 to 1885. They build this hotel in 45 days. Remarkable, knowing that buildings take 9 months, a year, years or more to build in some cases. But I think part of the story there is that it wasn't much of a building.
Mm-hmm.
Great letter from an early guest at the hotel who rode the train from Chicago to Medora and then the stagecoach to Deadwood, and she talks about how the entire thing was dirtier on the inside than it was on the outside.
Oh,
Very primitive conditions. Upstairs, not individual hotel rooms as we think of today, but large open rooms where people shared bigger spaces. So maybe it was a little stretch to call it the Metropolitan Hotel. But that was it.
Mhm. Well, but the Marquis had some pretty flamboyant ideas.
Yes. Go back to how he even got there, and where did this money come from? From whom?
Well, it came from wherever he could get it.
Wasn't it like, for instance, his father-in-law?
Yeah, much of his enterprise was funded by his father-in-law, who was legitimately very wealthy, earned his wealth with the Erie Canal and Erie Electric and those industrial projects. Well-known and influential guy. The von Hoffmans were his wife's parents.
Mm-hmm.
So what would have made people want to stop and even stay over at Medora back then?
Well, a couple things. So as the railroad was finished or connected through northern part of the U.S., the railroad companies were doing everything they could to promote riding the train as a tourist activity. So come and see the land, get on the train at Chicago or points east, ride it across the American West, see herds of bison and, probably cowboys and Indians fighting and all that. That's the lore that the railroad was promoting.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it wasn't like today where you get on the train and you can be somewhere relatively quickly. At that time, it's a slow-moving operation. There are breakdowns. There are things that require you to stop along the way. Medora was in the Marquis' time. Another thing industry I'll say that he was trying to develop is stage line to Deadwood. Deadwood was being promoted as kind of this another Wild West boomtown.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, mining activity and other reasons to visit Deadwood. Medora was the closest stop to get off the train and ride stagecoach. There was a stage line from Bismarck to Deadwood, but from Medora it was the shortest route. And in fact, they promoted it as a 36-hour stagecoach trip from Medora to Deadwood. The record, I think, was 29 hours, which you can fly from here to New York City in a few hours. But that was the sort of perspective at that time.
So then that trail or that road that the stage line took from Medora to Deadwood, has that been, developed into a state highway?
Not exactly, because it kind of, and I love Medora history. Different people in Medora, I would defer to as having more knowledge on the stagecoach, for example. But they started here. I believe it generally followed the Little Missouri River for a while, and then veered a little more toward Deadwood. But
and really south of Medora, you're in the Badlands, the rough Badlands there. How far south of Medora into the Badlands do you have to go until the land perhaps flattens out or straightens out, so that those horses are pulling that coach aren't working so hard?
Yeah, well, they're working. They were working. I think if I remember right, that history 10 to 15 miles intervals, and they're switching out horses and, at times drivers, I suppose, along the way.
Sure.
As that traverses. You're absolutely right. It is very rough in places, but also very, very beautiful.
Yes, so much
So as long as you can hang on.
Yes.
And the seats are comfortable. Before we leave this topic, tell us why Medora is the town. Why is it called Medora?
Well, so Medora is named again by the Marquis, our founder, for his wife. Medora von Hoffman was her given name at birth, and then when she marries the Marquis, she gets a long 7-name title, the Marquesa, being the beginning of that. But named for Medora, his wife, and she was named after an aunt, I believe.
Okay. I wonder how she felt about having this town named after her. Did she even really like being where she was out in the Medora area?
She, if you have an opportunity to read about Medora the Marquesa, incredible woman of her time, fluent in a number of languages. She was an artist. She painted beautiful watercolor. Hunted, though, was an incredible shot with a rifle. So she's going on hunting trips. I think she loved it. In that there were so many different ways you could go or things to do.
Mm-hmm.
We call their home, which is a State Historical Society property today, the Chateau DeMores. Mm-hmm. They didn't view it as a chateau at all. That's sort of our 1930s and since tourist lingo. They viewed it as a hunting cabin or a hunting lodge. Not nearly as nice as what they were used to in terms of architecture and sort of grandeur, mm-hmm. but seemed to really embrace and love that sort of Wild West time. And then, in the fall, they would return to New York or perhaps to Europe. So, striking that balance of both summer fun and then winter living.
Sure. Jackie, what's the next question you have, getting us into the little more recent history?
Move into the hotel in the 50s.
Yes.
Yes.
So what happened then with the hotel to get us to that point?
Yeah, so I was kind of talking about the irony, or what I see as irony, between the Marquis, in a way, funding or enabling a competitor. The next step in that journey is Fitzgerald goes back to the Marquis yet again, gets a loan to upgrade his hotel, improve it, plaster, furnishings, make it better. Marquis gives him the loan, and Fitzgerald, the owner, takes the money and runs. Doesn't put it into the hotel. So the hotel had kind of a quiet period, late 1800s, reopens in 1901. A few years later, it's renamed the Rough Riders Hotel in honor of Theodore Roosevelt, who at that moment in history was president. Operates at the Rough Riders as the Rough Riders Hotel from the early 1900s, about 1901, into 1940s. Of course, World War II is happening. Much of our efforts and attention as a country naturally is focused on the war effort. The hotel does close at that time for a year, reopens at kind of an interesting moment. So post-World War II, hotel reopens. It's not fancy, not what we think of today with a hotel or the Rough Riders Hotel, but it's sort of the city hub. So everything from a gas pump out front to being the Greyhound bus stop, serving the community in those ways in the 40s and moving into the 50s. At that point is a 60, 70-year-old structure that was built quickly and on a limited budget. So it isn't in great shape, but again, it is sort of serving the community as sort of a town hub. And also at that same time, backing up a little, when Theodore Roosevelt dies in 1919, there's a local effort to create Theodore Roosevelt National Park. That started, like I said, in 1919, soon after the president's death. Of course, TR, among other accomplishments, was sort of known as a conservationist president. So it was fitting to dedicate wild land to that. But that doesn't get done until 1947. So, more than a generation of effort to get that done. And of course, coming out of World War II, there's national confidence and excitement, and kind of it could be said that kind of America's at its peak, or the U.S. is really driving some great things forward. That's when the park happens, 1947 officially. Into the 1950s now, the community and the area is feeling like we've done that. We have the national park. It's great. We should get more people to come and experience this great new thing. So one of the things they did as the years passed and we got to 1958, which would have been Theodore Roosevelt's 100th birthday, the community got together to start an outdoor drama called Old Four Eyes, which over a series of years became the Medora musical, which opened, of course, in 1965. So in that time, again, I think it's, certainly not a year or a moment, but from the 40s, 47, when the park was formed, into and through the 50s, kind of this transformational moment of Medora being reborn as a tourism destination, a place for people to go enjoy the scenery and the landscape and the national park, but also now starting to tell that story of history, Roosevelt and the Marquis, our founder, and kind of all the other sort of legends of the area.
So when this started to go on, when the original musical Old Four Eyes, and I kind of think that our family went to that. It was quite an experience. I remember a little bit of it anyway. I was only 8 years old at that time. But how did the Rough Rider then spruce itself up to draw people to stay there?
Well, that only happened because of maybe another stroke of luck, which was Harold Schaefer, who, of course, started Gold Seal Company in 1942, had incredible success himself in the 40s, coming into the 50s. At that point, Gold Seal started as floor wax and furniture polish. Had incredible success with glass wax, a window cleaner. Then Snowy Bleach comes into the picture, and 1961, the beginning of Mr. Bubble. Those household products fueled the success of Gold Seal Company and enabled it essentially to invest in Medora. So Harold Schaefer, whose company was started in Auwys, was based in Bismarck. While he was a traveling salesman in those early years of his company, he's often driving past Medora in the Badlands, going into eastern Montana to sell his products. Auwys is intrigued by the Badlands of Medora as he's passing through, begins to get involved with Old Four Eyes, serving on their board in kind of probably the second half of its existence. Kind of sees that doing that same show year after year isn't going to work forever. So he wants to continue to do something great, but something that will attract more people and be able to grow and flourish. Part of that vision was also doing the right thing and doing what he could to help Medora. Russell Reed was longtime director of the State Historical Society. He also had a fondness for Medora, of course, the chateau, a new historic site kind of in those post-war years. He had a relationship with Harold Schaefer. They talked about how great it'd be if the Rough Riders Hotel could be a museum for the state. Harold Schaefer, in sort of his typical way, which was sometimes flamboyant, goes to the owner, whose husband had won the hotel in a poker game, buys the hotel from her, the widow of this poker player. Anyway, buys the hotel, takes the deed to Russell Reed, the historical director's office, lays that on his desk and said, here's the deed. I think it's a great idea. Let's do this. Reed goes to the state legislature for funding. They flat out turn him down. No way, we're not building a museum in Medora. Forget it. So Reed gives the deed back to Harold Schaefer, who decides if the state's not doing a museum, I'll rebuild the hotel. So he commits to dismantling the old hotel board by board, labeling and preserving as much lumber as they could. And there are a few other artifacts that were found in that process. Reconstruct the hotel in a modern way that had things like running water, a roof that didn't leak, windows that kept the weather out, and also some amenities like air conditioning and, of course, good electrical lighting and power. All of that is happening starting in the end of the 50s and in the early 60s, moving toward a grand opening in 1965, along with some of the other enterprises that he made possible.
Okay.
Yes.
Were there other people in the state who had thought of perhaps joining Harold Schaefer in developing Medora and the Rough Rider Hotel?
I think I can't say that I know a lot. I mean, specifically from a business or investment standpoint, but the idea generated a lot of excitement because, people who were young in Medora in the early 1900s or kind of grew up here, still living in the community in the 50s and 60s. And in our archives, there's some great contributions, like an early guest register from the Rough Riders Hotel that somebody had, and they, made a note that said, Harold, we love what you're doing with the hotel. We thought this might be of interest to you, and it is, right for the person who's committed.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of see that community support, and lots of people. There's one of the great fun things they did with the hotel was in the 60s. There's Stockmen's Association meetings in Medora. They'd invite those attending to bring their brands, and there's great imagery of the Stockmen's members branding the front of the hotel. Unfortunately, in the process, maybe setting it on fire, but all was well.
Wow.
That was taken care of. And
did they have to pay? Is that something that if they wanted their brand on there, they had to give a donation?
I don't think so. I think the way I understand it, during those meetings, it was sort of something to thank the group for being in Medora and supporting Medora and meeting here. I'm certain that the hotel and Gold Seal's activities in Medora in those early years weren't profitable, but it's remarkable that, and fortunate that I think Harold Schaefer had the ability through his success to do things that maybe weren't the best business decisions.
So then in the 60s, the Interstate 94 come through that area, or was it still Highway 10 that would come through Medora itself?
Yeah, so in the 50s, of course, Old Red Trail, I know you've explored that on your journey in the preceding 186 episodes.
That's right.
But Old Highway 10 in this part of North Dakota was the Old Red Trail, not actually a highway at all in places, scoria roads. So there's a great sort of legendary debate about the Old Red Trail being red because it was scribbled out on the map in red.
Yeah.
But also local lore that the Old Red Trail was the Old Red Trail because of the red dust and dirt that came off the scoria.
Yeah. But I think it was probably named before they got to Medora.
Yes. All the way from down.
Why not grab what you can?
Right. Whatever works, exactly. Yeah, and that literally passed through the community by the front door of the hotel, and meandered west to Sentinel Butte and Beach and beyond.
Mhm.
Um, and then, yeah, of course, the interstate and the way that was built changed things a little bit, but probably now for the traffic we have in a good way,
Mhm.
having that right through Medora would be a lot at times. So.
And dangerous too, with with the
Exactly.
number
So
of cars and people.
bring
Yeah.
us up to date then. How many rooms does the hotel now have?
So that Harold Schaefer reconstruction in the 50s and 60s had 9 rooms above the restaurant in the hotel, kind of the original main portion.
Yeah.
50 years later, that is getting to be in rough shape, and the hotel was reconstructed again and expanded. At that time, those rooms were redone to 8. Accessibility to them was improved, and then we added a 68-room tower on the north edge of the property. So it's connected, but we try to be careful to sort of maintain the form of that original part of the hotel in the front, with the lobby and new rooms being kind of behind.
So you mentioned the restaurant in the hotel. Tell us, are there specialty items that are served there just because it is the TR location, basically?
Yeah, we try to have some fun with that. So, of course, TR had a lot of different experiences through his life. Born and raised in New York City. So we play with that in Theodore's, the dining room and the tavern that's with it, kind of theming things to TR himself, cocktail menu items, although TR didn't drink much, so maybe we're stretching a little. And then, of course, the whole reason TR came to the Badlands was to hunt bison before they were all gone. So we have an incredible bison ossobuco on the menu that will make you love everything about bison and that dining room.
Okay. Tell
That's
us,
a game.
is there a pitchfork fondue now? Is that associated with the musical, or how does one? What
Yep.
can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So Medora Musical during our summer season, so this year, June 4th through mid-September, runs Tuesday through Sunday. Prior to the show, every one of those nights, there's a pitchfork steak fondue where big New York strip steaks are skewered onto a pitchfork and fondued in gigantic pots.
Wow.
And that's served with all kinds of great stuff like fresh melon and vegetables and beans and potatoes and kind of everything you'd expect. And that's all on the hilltop above the amphitheater where the musical's held. So great views down the river valley and over to the chateau, thinking about our founder and that legend. So great dining.
Has there been a centennial type celebration for the hotel?
That's a good question. So we tend to celebrate in Medora the founding of the community and kind of those milestones. So 100, 125, Medora now being over 140 years old. I guess now that you say that, the hotel first opened 140 years ago this year.
Okay.
But we don't necessarily celebrate each of those as much as kind of the whole presentation. And this year, Medora Musical is celebrating 60 years, which is really a really fun milestone to hit. Last year, our little Old Town Hall Theater downtown turned 100. And that kind of worked with the hotel almost in tandem, and another sort of like community hub for all those years, from the first boom through the first bust and into Medora today.
Sometimes it takes a bust to make a boom, a reboom.
But yeah, it's that is, I think, something you can see across North Dakota in our region, that there is that tenacity and like willingness to reinvent yourself, and sometimes for survival, but other times to thrive or be even better. So.
So tell us about what is going to happen on July 4th of 2026.
So July 4th, speaking of celebrations, July 4th, 2026 is America's 250th birthday, right? Our, I believe that's sesquicentennial is the fancy word, which I won't attempt to spell. But America turns 250, and at the federal level, they're working on, I believe, up to 10 national celebrations. We are hoping that Medora is one of those locations as they open Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library.
Yes.
That's a separate organization that's been working hard to advance that project for a long time. The construction's well underway, and we're excited to be thinking about that celebration coming up.
That is quite unique to have a presidential library in a small town like Medora.
And especially from the subject of the hoopla is from New York.
Right. Yeah. One of our great American presidents. So, I mean, I think that's just it. He, TR, of course, grew up in New York, but often spoke about kind of how he progressed through his life, and certainly his time in the North Dakota Badlands was very, very important to his thoughts around conservation and, eventually his sort of legacy as a president.
Can you share with us about the style or design of the TR library?
Yeah, I can, at least on a superficial level, yes. The Presidential Library Foundation organization responsible for that project early on knew that it was, with a conservationist president, incredibly important to think about the architecture, and that could be said for all presidential libraries, I suppose, but even more important here, where they wanted and needed a large building, but also needed to preserve the land and sort of that landscape experience. So they had a design competition to gather ideas, and there are three kind of finalists, I guess you'd say, eventually presented their idea to the library organization as well as the community, and great engagement in the community to kind of look at those ideas. People gave feedback, what they liked or maybe didn't like about each. Snøhetta is the entity that ultimately was selected as a result of that competition. And they've done an incredible job of, I think, of designing a building now that sort of swells out of the land. Eventually there will be, grass growing fully on the roof, so that you really don't see the structure at all from many angles. And then under that sort of arc is this massive museum that's really well built into the landscape. But an important part of that landscape experience, or museum experience, for the library was incorporating outdoor and natural things with the museum. So beautiful views of the Badlands. And they'll have this incredible, I believe it's roughly quarter mile boardwalk around the whole top of the hill. So you can, again, be outside and experience different views, or traverse over the roof of the library and get yet other views. So it's really amazing the way they're approaching the design and how it is situated on the hilltop, and kind of how you arrive and engage with the whole thing, not just the interior displays, but also what's outside and around the building. And an important part, most presidential libraries are kind of a result of a presidency, and then planning starts and it's built. In this case, the president had been out of office for over 100 years.
Right.
When the specifics of this library project were being planned, although the efforts started before that, of course. But in any case, the exhibits inside aren't quite typical or traditional museum exhibits either. It's being planned to be much more interactive and engaging, so that you know, from very little kids who aren't even able to read yet, they'll have a certain experience, all the way up to you know, elderly. Of course, it's accessible and is intended to serve that full range. So.
That's what I think. We had the pleasure of being in Medora last summer and going to the musical, and for the rough land that is around there, it was so easily, everything was so easily accessible. It is so well thought out and it becomes so inviting for a person of any age or any physical, with many if they have physical disabilities. They got it covered. You've got it covered. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm really glad to hear that. It's, you know, I think, so we can talk about all of these great different things. They all exist together in the Badlands. The way I see it, that is the magic, the land first. It's a really unique place in North Dakota. I mean, whether it's driving past Painted Canyon on Interstate 94 as you come down, or as you exit the interstate and come over that butte and down into Medora, it's the land first. And Harold Schaefer, many years ago, when he was relatively early in his Medora investment, characterized it as the Badlands are human scaled, where the Grand Canyon, of course, is massive and vast and impressive in its own right, but the Badlands feel like they're big, and yet I can climb that mountain and I can explore that and experience that. And I think that is, with me, that's always resonated. I think it's really succinct. And again, you know, being from the beautiful prairies of North Dakota myself, coming into the Badlands, there's something unique to appreciate, complementary to, like I say, prairies and grasslands of much of our state. But part of it is, making experiences that are accessible, because we want everyone, whether it's their first time or their 50th, to be able to experience that tradition in a way that is comfortable and not taxing. So glad to hear that.
Yes. Do you anticipate, when the presidential libraries open, that there will be an addition put on to the Rough Riders Hotel in order to accommodate more guests?
So going back to the beginning of our talk today, the Marquis and his thought that Medora would be the biggest city, you know, between the coasts. I can't fathom that, because there's just a finite amount of land before you're, you know, climbing a butte. So right behind the Rough Riders Hotel is a boundary to the national park, and of course you can't build a hotel in a national park today. I think I'm certain that there will be more hotel or lodging opportunities that offer options different than the hotel, but again, complementary, so that if you can't get a room at the hotel because it's the best place to stay in town, there are other options that will hopefully meet your needs. And at some point, we hope everyone will get a chance to stay at the Rough Riders, because there is something magical about, I think, about being right there in the middle of town and being able to walk and do the activities in town. And then, of course, a short drive to the musical each night.
Kinley, this has been a marvelous walk down memory lane for Medora, North Dakota, and the Badlands, and President Teddy Roosevelt, and now the excitement of the TR Presidential Library opening at Medora next July 4th. How fun will that be? And Jack and I sure hope that we can be there to experience
we do too.
it as well.
We plan to be there some way, somehow.
Come on over. It'll be an awesome time, both the opening, but more so the future. So excellent.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for being our guest. It's been fun.
Yeah,
you too. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Jackie.
So viewers, don't forget to tell your friends, even your relatives, about all these wonderful 1950s fun chats. So until next time, toodaloo.
Bye-bye.